which is 79. You, meaning the Venus Project, you place great emphasis on human behaviour as opposed to human nature. Would you define both? So, I don't know, maybe because you haven't filled it in, I might pick on you guys to say things first. So, I don't know, James, do you fancy having a crack at that?
So, the emphasis is on free will. Was on the fact that there's no free will. Was that? So
that's part of the question, yeah.
Yeah, like it's a question of free will. So someone asked me about that once actually, and they said, I said to them, well, do you believe in free will? And I was like, yeah, of course I do. And I says, well, there is no such thing as free will. And I says, well, that's not true because look, and they pick up their cup up. So I'm picking this cup up. I can choose to put it down. And I go, but the fact that you picked up that cup and put it down, would you have done that if I hadn't have raised the question? So the fact that I have made the subject, the fact that I've raised that question, made them respond in that way. So I think people, quite rightly, empirically, they base their knowledge of the world on what they experience, and because they feel as though they're making decisions actively, they believe that they have free will. However, that's quite a micro view of existence. If you don't take a macro stance and look at how through history there's trends in behaviour, and if you don't see yourself as being part of that, I think that's what leads to it. I think the Venus Project advocates understanding that you are part of a system, that you are part of a larger community, not just with humans, but with the world itself and nature. And a big part of accepting the Venus Project, I think personally, the one concept you'd have to accept is that there is no such thing as free will, that we are ultimately, controlled by our environment. And if you don't believe that, you will never believe the Venus Project. That's the one thing you have to believe in order to follow the Venus Project.
Well, I would maybe argue that I was into the Venus Project for probably 6, 7, 8 months before I really came to terms with it. Like the idea that there's no free will. I think it was just one day I was having a pee and I was like, wait, I didn't choose to do this. And that's when it started twigging.
Yeah, totally. I've been following this for about a year, on and off, but like over the past few months, I actually understood it. Like I'd sort of been listening to Jack Fresco, and I just took his word for it, but I didn't really believe it. I didn't know I could believe it. It didn't make sense to me. But recently I've started understanding, and it's refreshing to know that. But yeah, so I guess that's my answer. I hope that's the question.
It doesn't really, but it's a very good insight into free will, so I'll take that. Free will is so interlinked with this concept of human nature, but not, I don't know, I don't want to draw a line between it. How about, I don't know, I don't want to do mine yet because it's quite harsh. Oh well, I'll do it. So basically it's asked us to define human nature and human nurture, human behaviour and human nurture. I said human behaviour refers to the mechanistic aspects of the actions of humans, which very tied in with no such thing as free will. While human nature is often a term which shows a lack of willingness to understand what causes behaviour. Generally, that's how I kind of. I maybe wouldn't say that straight to someone who's coming at me with the human nature approach, but that's the way I see it. I see there is no such argument. It's not a thing. There's certain aspects of our life which is controlled by things in our DNA, which are beyond our control. Okay, fair enough. That doesn't mean that certain people are certain things. Generally, though, I think I'm going 90%. We're on things that are experientially learned. past your basic biological structure, then you get into learned behavior, and experiential is generally what I see the differences. I see these two things when people ask me about this. I think they're asking, is it learnt or is it genetic? That's what I understand from human nature, basically. Is it genetic? But normally that's not what people mean. People just say, oh, it's human nature and don't want to talk about it. Right, Nick?
Yeah, well, human behaviour is dependent on environment. Many things we wrongly call human nature are just products of human environment. We take the fight for food. Humans will fight for food if none is available, and share it if it's plentiful. Which of these traits is human nature? Neither, or possibly both. Human behaviour is based on environment and surroundings, which is what I believe everyone's been touching on. It's a kind of, you could go on forever about this, because the nature nurture debate, and I found the same sort of things. People will just dismiss things as human nature. Greed is a thing that often comes up. It's human nature to be greedy, but again, it's environment. If you think food is going to be scarce, you wish to stockpile it and have more than you need for fear of running out. If you know it's plentiful, you don't. You can fill your space with other stuff rather than a big stockpile of food. So big question that you could take forever answering it, in my opinion, but I think that, essentially, what people wrongly call human nature is just simply human behaviour.
Angus, remembering the stars. Good work. You're up.
Yeah, I think you touched on a really good point, and it's all about that matter of perception and realizing that when you look at the food distribution, and if it is in scarce supply, then people will fight harder for that right to have it and potentially go above and beyond what they potentially need. So it really does all come down to perception and conditioning, which very much is entangled with the system that you're actually involved with. If you can create a system in which you can take away people's fears to know that there is an abundance and everyone will be looked after in the same sort of capacity, then that potential for greed and bravado and macho-ness of wanting more than your potential competitors will be significantly reduced, and over the course of generations that will potentially be reduced to the extent where it is no longer a factor or thought of or seen as taboo in that sort of environment.
Completely agree. Very nice. I guess open floor for a sec. If anyone wants to ask about anything else, add in more before we go on to the real answer.
In regards to what people have said about human nature and touching on how the environment affects behaviour. I agree with what's been said. I don't think that human nature is just an observation of the trends that have been identified throughout history. But throughout history, there's always been the same sort of scarcity of resources. The same environment has been prevalent. People have had to fight in order to get resources, and for many people to view that for the information they have, it makes sense. But when you learn about the Venus Project, you learn about elements of psychology and findings from Jack Fresco that he's made in his time. So really what it comes down to is that once you have the education to know that what you read, the correlations you make through history aren't necessarily the absolutes. You have to look at a different system. I don't think people really know that it's possible to have a different system. I don't think people know. I think there's a lot of problems in today's society, and I say micro problems, social problems. People know something's wrong, and they don't know what's wrong, and they wouldn't know how to make it better if like they knew what the problem was. And I think that leads into a lot of like social problems. I'm doing some research currently on how like alcohol consumption is linked with depression in younger generations today. Like, yeah, I've read a few books about it. And like, people seem to there's a trend of like people drinking alcohol going out, but also it's linked with the sort of the economic problems. It is almost a symptom of people like wanting to escape that, not knowing like how to, you know, how to cope, I guess. So I don't know.
Yeah, I think I heard about a very similar thing in the Depression in the US. Like, I think I saw a study or something on it. Yeah, it's very interesting. I think what like generally people today, myself until I came across this, you think what you're given is everything. You know what I mean? We've got, you know, on today's planet, we've got like what 4 or 5 maybe different systems of stuff, like capitalism, communism as it is today, which is still basically capitalism, socialism, like dictatorships and like empires. And like you think kind of, well, that's it. So, and they all basically use the same monetary system underneath. So you think, oh well, it's happening in America and it happened in Russia in like the 60s or whatever. Therefore, it's human nature. But really, the actual environments aren't that different.
You mentioned like the different, you know, capitalism, communism, etc. And I had a thought the other day. It was on Guy Fawkes Night, in fact, when the march was going on in London, and there was a huge police force protecting well, I don't know what they were doing actually, but you know, protecting something from the people wearing masks, the dangerous people wearing masks. And it occurred to me that, you know, if you're in a dictatorship, you know, and you're going on a march against the government, yeah, well, yeah, you're likely to be shot, but you expect that kind of policing. When the election was happening, I had a Conservative MP come and knock on my door and have a chat with me, and I asked him, you know, what exactly is it that you believe you're doing for me? You know, because I'd not seen him before, you know, and he'd had plenty of time to knock on my door when he wasn't canvassing. So I just wondered what he was doing. And he said that, you know, one of the things the government do is protect me. So, I mean, if I didn't have a small child, I would have been in that march because, you know, I think Anonymous are fairly cool and have got like the right idea. And there's all those policemen there protecting the establishment. Well, you know, the Conservative MP had said that he protected me. You know, the government protected me. Well, you know, my parents protected me. You know, when they were alive, they looked after me, they protected me. They didn't need a wall of police between me and them. You know, any government that needs protecting from the people has got to be a shit government. You know, it's as simple as that. And all governments across the world right now all seem to fear their people, whether it's a democracy, whether it's a capitalist society, whether it's a dictatorship, but all governments seem to fear their people, and that's got to be wrong, and also, it's picking up on what James said, that the good point is people do know something's wrong. They might not know what to do about it. They might be confused and think that, well, whatever, but they do know something's wrong, and every idea has to grow. When I was, dare I say it, yeah, indeed, Angus, when I was, I want to say, well, your age, much younger, 20, 30 years ago, I still knew there was something wrong, but not many people around me did. So it's actually refreshing to see that people now know something's wrong. So I see it as a positive because I'm old, and it's new that you young fellas are all waking up. That it's a new thing, which is great. Because this will snowball. And I'll shut up and let someone else talk now.
It's good, man. I'm sure your Conservative MP really does believe that he is helping you and protecting you. They all do. They're insane. Alright, so cracking on with the question and answer off the website. So question 79, you place great emphasis on human behaviour as opposed to human nature. Would you define both? There's no such thing as human nature in the conventional sense of being a set of predetermined, pre-programmed behaviours and values to which all human beings are predisposed. What we are concerned with is human behaviour and values, which can certainly be changed. If they could not, we would still be living in caves. The question we should be concerned with is, what are the factors that shape human behaviour? We feel that human behaviour is just as lawful as any natural phenomenon. Our customs, behaviours and values are byproducts of our culture. If the environment is unaltered, similar problems and behaviours will occur. The Venus Project proposes to provide an environment that will bring out the best in human behaviour and to extend maximum courtesy to all nations. Take, for example, the situation witnessed in World War II. Even the most respectable families could be seen fighting over scraps of food. When people's basic needs are not met, they resort to whatever behaviour is necessary to ensure the necessities of life for themselves and their families. By making the necessities of life available for all in this participatory democracy and through a meaningful and productive education, we can dramatically reduce counterproductive behaviour. Wow. They've actually used the phrase participatory democracy. I don't think I've ever seen the Venus Project use that phrase before. Interesting.
I'd imagine that it was carefully thought and participatory democracy rather than this false. Well, we haven't got a democracy, have we? We've actually got a dictatorship that has got dictatorship crossed out and democracy written underneath in red crayon, so we believe it.
No, you're right. It was just kind of interesting to me because I've had this discussion with people who said participatory democracy, and I've gone over the semantics of that word a few times, and I don't think it quite actually defines the Venus Project in my understanding of the word democracy, meaning you have to have a majority vote. That, to me, that doesn't make sense. And I'm not entirely sure what the participatory means in it. To me, people who are qualified get a vote.
Well, I was going to say
maybe what that means.
Yeah, that's going to create a question for you at the next point of contact meeting, isn't it?
No, that's cool. I'll write that down and ask Ulysses. He's going to ask. Cool. Well, that's fine. Anything else on that question before we move on? And I know the next question is basically the same, so we'll maybe skip through that fairly fast. Right, so question 80, isn't this, the Venus Project, or our resource-based economy, against human nature? Anyone?
I can, as I said in the previous answer, human nature is largely a fallacy, created by the environment. Like you said, and sorry, James, I just butted in, didn't I, and didn't see the star. Bad Ras. But yeah, I think it is the same question, sort of, and we're going to go over a lot of the same ground. I'm sure there's been many people looking at what human nature is over time, and yeah, it seems to be that it doesn't really exist, does it?
So I think when people use the word human nature, using it correctly, and what I mean by that is what they're doing is they're identifying a trend that humans have displayed in a consistent environment throughout history. But what they don't understand is that human nature is based on environment, but they just take it as there's only one possible environment you could have, scarcity. The possibility of having no scarcity they don't even think it's possible. But what they don't realise is that if you were to attain such a condition, they don't know if you could, but if you were to do that, then human nature, as they call it, would be different. You would have a different human nature. And if you can take that example further, you could then say, well, human nature is simply how people act in a certain environment. But yeah, I agree though. Like saying that human nature isn't absolute it's when someone says if their answer is it's human nature. Well, all they're saying that when they say, if you say, for example, in the Venus Project, aberrant behavior wouldn't exist due to these conditions being met, and they're saying that's not true, it's human nature, then what they're saying is that I don't believe there could be conditions where people wouldn't behave aberrantly. But what you need to do then is then show them that those conditions do exist. And then when they realize it's possible to have an environment where you don't act aggressively and you don't have all these cultural backlashes, etc., and those things developing, once they believe that's possible, and to do that, they have to believe that free will doesn't exist. So once that all happens and they believe that, then you say to them, here's the Venus Project. And then they go, okay, yeah, I can see how human nature would be different in that environment. So I think, and just for me, like I've thought about that beforehand, and when I was like talking to people, like in the early stages of knowing the Venus Project, when I started to try to tell my family and friends, I'd almost try and be logical to them, like say the reason why I failed was because I was telling them the Venus Project without changing their outlook on free will, on human nature. Without doing that first, they couldn't accept. It's like trying to shove a huge key into a lock, which the lock that their mind just wasn't configured to take that information. You had to change the way they thought in order for this Venus Project to come in and be compatible with the way they think. So I think when we're educating people on the Venus Project, we have to help them understand our concepts and values derived from the beliefs within this resource-based economy. Once you do that, when you deliver them the Venus Project, it makes sense to them because they can understand it. But when they don't understand that those conditions could be met, they think, well, those conditions can't be met, so what you're telling me is illogical to them. See what I mean? So I've lost my trail of thought, but yeah.
Yeah, just to reiterate what James said, I agreed with most of your content there, and yeah, I agree. It's all about shifting the goalposts of perspective and realizing what the potential could be and changing that mindset. And in doing that, you will eventually change human nature at its very core by creating them with different conditions in which they can flourish in an environment which is at the moment fairly foreign to them, and it will mean that their priorities will shift along with this, and so different attributes in human nature will be exacerbated and others will be dimmed.
Nice. And so I guess I just go back to what I said in the thing. James, you just gave me a great idea of how to speak to someone. When you said human nature can change, that's brilliant. You got to convince someone that human nature can change. If they say, that's human behavior, human nature, go, was it human nature 5,000 years ago? Quite a lot of, I don't know, it depends on what the situation is. But if you can kind of get them to go like, oh, maybe it was different in the past, and you go, oh, maybe it's not, that kind of break down the absolute gently. That is just a good idea. I wanted to share it with you. I think I'll give it a go, and anyway, it gives me that malarkey anymore. Another one was when you say introducing people to the Venus Project, you're definitely right. And like the perfect way to go about it would be to introduce them to some of the different fields that are fairly disparate. So like free will and mechanistic point of view, maybe a bit of linguistics or a bit of like biology. Just get them interested in little bits of these things, and then suddenly the Venus Project clicks together, and it's like, oh, that joins in with that, joins in with that. I never thought of it that way because I went to school and I did biology. or I did maths. That was, for me, was a big part of it, coming out of it, just being able to learn about all these different aspects of life that actually jumbled together to make this concept up. My actual answer was basically the same as what I've already said. So human nature is a fallacy, is a fable excuse for someone who's unwilling to contemplate the reasons the behavior is called. Yeah, that's fine. Everything else has been said. James.
Yeah, just adding to what you were saying then about breaking people into it. Like, yeah, I agree. Like when you're going to someone, and I don't know, and when I'm starting to talk to people now, I almost like don't even mention the Venus Project anymore. Like, if someone completely new, like, for example, my girlfriend, for example, I've mentioned the Venus Project a few times, and she didn't really agree with it. I didn't press it, but as we're talking, she'll say things like, and I'll say, oh, I don't believe that there's bad people, and I'll say, well, if you look at this person, like he's experienced this in his life, which has made him feel this way, probably, and just explain like qualities of the way I think, take into account people's history and how there is no bad people. Like, people are just, what they are. If you take a cake and you say the cake is bad, that doesn't mean anything. A cake is the ingredients you put into it, how long you cooked it for, whether you washed your hands when you put it together, how well you mixed the ingredients together, how fresh they were. Like, good or bad has nothing to do with it. If you don't like the taste of it, it's because the flavors are mixed together in a way that your taste buds and your conditioning in your mind it doesn't favor that. That's all that means. It doesn't mean good or bad. They're just your opinions. But it's hard to sort of tell someone that. So you have to like gradually over time sort of like, as you were saying, educate, show them a bit of biology, show them a bit of linguistics or whatever. And eventually, once they start to think that way, they'll view the world differently, and then you can start talking about the problems that exist. And then if they agree that there is problems, and you say money's the problem, isn't it? They go, actually, yeah, money is the problem. Oh god. And I said, I wonder if there's a way of something that could be done about that. If we could change that. I don't know. Well, actually, remember when I mentioned the Venus Project ages ago, and you weren't interested in it? Do you mind if I just talk to you about that again? And then you can bring that in, and they're like, oh, actually, I can see what you're talking about, because it's something that makes sense now. So that's one way to go about it. Because in the past, I sort of went to people, and that's where the Venus Project is about this, and they were just like, no, I can't see that working. I think it's a nice idea, but I don't think it'll ever happen. That's what people say.
It's the reason why Zeitgeist Addendum was really good, because the first half of the movie was life is shit, life is shit, life is shit. Is that make it better? Cool. All right. Let's go look at the real answer. Oh, it's a long one. And
Yeah, good luck.
yeah. Okay. TVP FAQ 80, isn't this against human nature? From H.G. Wells, the anti-progressiveness of the early 20th century loved to assert that human nature was never altered. To imagine that the men of the Stone Age felt and thought like bank clerks picnicking in the cave, and the ideas of Confucius and Buddha were easily interchangeable with the ideas of Rousseau, Karl Marx, and De Wint. They are not simply ignorant but misinformed about almost every essential fact in the past experiences and present situation of the race. That was all H.G. Wells. The New Utopian by Robert Bogoslaw, about almost every essential fact in the past experiences and present situation of the race. That was all H.G. Wells. The New Utopian by Robert Bogoslaw, something like that. As Norman R.F. Mailer and others point out years ago, the term human nature is characteristically used as a screen to hide our ignorance about man in general, and one of the more elementary oversights made in discussions of human behavior consists of ignoring the fact that the actions of men are set in motion by external as well as internal forces. As Arthur C. Clarke and many other forward writers have pointed out, anyone who brings up human nature question is naive. From the book Looking Forward by Jacques Fresco, when little was known about cultural anthropology, sociology and psychology, it seemed quite valid to resist proposed reforms in saying, it won't work, it's against human nature. It's difficult for many people to appreciate the fact that what they call human nature just doesn't exist. People are like mirrors and they largely reflect their surroundings. If people were to come down into the world with a fixed nature consisting of automatic responses, civilization would be impossible. Like the ants, we would live out our lives in patterns that are modified but little with the passing of time. The wonderful thing about us is that we come into the world with maximum flexibility. From the best that money can't buy. Bigotry, race, nationalism, jealousy, superstition, greed, and self-centered behavior are all learned patterns of behavior, which are strengthened by or reinforced by our upbringing. These patterns of behavior are not inherited human traits or human nature, as most people have been taught to believe. If the environment remains unaltered, similar behavior will reoccur. When we come into the world, we arrive with a clean slate as far as our relationships with others are concerned. In the final analysis, any judgment regarding undesirable human behavior serves no purpose, without an attempt to alter the environment that creates it. In a society that provides for most human needs, constructive behavior would be reinforced, and people who have difficulty interacting in the community would be helped rather than imprisoned. Aspiring to a particular ethical behavior has to do with human aspirations and ideals. Functional morality is the ability to provide a process level to achieve a sustainable environment for all people. By this we mean providing clean air and water, goods and services, and a healthy and innovative environment that is emotionally and intellectually fulfilling. It is difficult to conceive of any solutions that would serve the interests of the majority in a monetary-based system. None of this can be accomplished without a comprehensive redesigning of our social system and eventual replacement of the monetary system with a resource-based economy. now I'm going to have a drink.
A round of applause for managing to read all of that.
I'm really bad at reading and speaking at the same time. I think I've got better by doing this, but I'm not good at it. I'm quite a slow reader. All right. Any questions on that then?
I think we've pretty much dismissed human nature as a thing. It's not a thing, is it?
Yeah. And great, we're all agreed on that. How about right in the last paragraph, it mentions functional morality. Do you guys understand what that's talking about? It says functional morality is the ability to provide a process level to achieve a sustainable environment for all people.
Enlighten me.
Well, I'm not 100% down on this myself. There's from the 70s and 80s lectures, there was a CD one called, I think it was called Functional Ethics, and it was talking about this a lot. It's one of the most interesting ones from that CD because it's a bit confusing. The way that I understand functional morality is instead of saying things are good or bad, you meet the needs of people, and that is moral, basically. And so it's just kind of redefining what is moral with a kind of functional side. Jay?
Yeah. Yeah, that links in actually. I just realised. Jack Fresco talks about functional morality, and he links that to language and how language is supposed to be functional in that sense. Everything in the future will be functional. I think functional is basically like in our culture we have, like when it says about functional ethics, we have ethics which are not functional. An example of how ethics are not functional. For example, I don't know. Where we say, if you steal, you're a bad person and you'll go to jail. That's not functional because just at the logical premises of someone has taken a small resource and you are using 10 or more than 10 times the resources required to house them, feed them in jail. That's an example of that. Also, you've got the backside to that of where the idea of saying that someone is bad and then goes into people's perception of people don't think that people are influenced by their environments. It links into a whole snowball effect, and then So I forgot what I was going to say. Oh God, I diverged. No. Okay, I'm not.
No, it's cool. It's still a kind of tricky area because if you're talking morality, then yeah, great. We get into linguistics, good, bad, doesn't exist, that kind of thing.
I'll talk about linguistics, but yeah, linguistics and like everything is has up to interpretation. That's what I think I was going to mention. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I think really what they're saying is instead of just labeling things good or bad, make them better. Design a system which, so functional morality, I would say, here's one that today is in morality in the field. I don't know, it's still law bound, but basically loud music late at night. There's a scientific way to go about saying music doesn't need to be this loud, it hurts your eardrums. Like, it hurts everyone's eardrums the same, maybe a bit of difference, but basically, past a certain volume, it's too loud, it's scientifically too loud, or past a certain time, or within a certain window at least, people need a certain amount of sleep and it's good for them. So you can build in a functional system of when music should be played, how loud it should be played. Whereas today, it's, someone will phone the cops and bust your pie.
It would be simple to have an area where you can be as loud as you like, one would imagine. After you, Angus.
Yeah, there was an interesting article I read in the news about these whistle car exhausts. They like put a little attachment onto your exhaust, and suddenly, whenever you pass emissions or whatever, out come all this whistling sounds, and you can hear it 5 blocks away. There does need to be a sort of morality complex in the fact that people have to see if their actions will actually impact people in a negative way, and there needs to be an education system to endeavor to create that environment where people will be safe, being free as possible, but not to the detriment of other people.
I've you know, and I think this sort of is a word that keeps coming up often in these hangouts. Probably get mentioned in the next answer as well, and that's education. You know, we are badly educated. You know, we're not taught about what it is to be human. We're not taught to deal with our emotions. We're not taught to relate to other people or in fact ourselves. And you know, with education, a lot of the issues that we have today, you know, would simply go away.
Definitely. All right. Good answers all around. Next one, A1. How do restless teenagers fit into the system, or rather, what is available for them to do? I'll start with, all right, I said, well, pretty much anything they want to do. Most teenagers today are restless because they have a kind of a need or a yearning to feel independent of their parents and explore the world. Today's society, kids are restless because there's nothing for them to do and they've got no money.
Yeah. So I was gonna say that in today's I went on a lecture which was mentioned before, and I can't remember what it was called. A lecture on YouTube. It was. Yeah, behavioral theory. Got the video here. I'll just pause that. I'll send you guys a link. I watched this, and he talks about how we put label in every language and every culture. We put labels and we categorize everything in language. So, for example, in one language you'll have the word blue. In another language they'll have their own word for something resembling blue, but the boundary between blue and what's next to it will have a different frequency and different width compared to what we have. And so when we translate languages, they have some correlations and some, but they're always different. And what I'm saying that because it links to how we categorize age as well. We're so absolute in our culture. We say you're at this point, and between these ages, you're a child. Between this age, you're a teenager. And there's all the stereotypical crap they stick onto you. You're a restless teenager. Well, if you tear away all that crap and you just see people, there's people at different ages, and really what's happening is from birth up till around 22 years old, you undergo a loss of plasticity. Plasticity is when the brain is reaching its final point of growth. When the brain finishes plasticity, it's finished growing, and your brain is now, all the modules in the brain are now fixed. The language module is where it would be. It's not going to change. That's your finished brain. So when people say a certain age group is a certain way, well, again, like they say, it's human nature. No, in a certain environment, they will behave a certain way. If you change the environment, they'll behave differently. And you ask, why does a certain group of people behave a certain way? Well, if you're going to go into stereotypes, why don't you ignore what stereotypes are? Stereotypes is just the behavior, and that doesn't really tell you the problem. You have to look at the environment in which that age group, which you're stereotyping, are in, and then say, how is their environment causing them to behave that way? And then that would lead into, they have no money, they want to become independent with their parents, like you were saying. So I think people, they say people are bad, people are this. They only look at the absolute, the finished product. They don't understand that, like if you bought a cake, you'll say, oh, it's a good cake, that, and this is a bad cake. It's like, no, not at all. You know, a cake is made up of things. People are made up of experiences and life events. Everything is made up of things. Things don't just like come out of thin air. So I think people they just take things for granted, and they don't. And the reason for that is because during their education, like Jack Fresco was talking about in the Venus Project, kids would be brought out and they'd be told, you know, they'd be shown how the plants grow and how the sun affects them. They'd be shown how all the biological processes start right from the ground up, right from birth. So they understood how the world works, so that they wouldn't say this is bad, this is good, because that doesn't mean anything. They know that things are made from other things. They'd question innately in their minds, how did that get to that point? What was the process? But without that sort of knowledge and education right from birth, that concept and that way of thinking just doesn't exist to you. You see things, you see cars on the shop, in the windows, you see products in the windows. You have no idea how to make them or how they work, because you've not been educated on how to think like that. You just see the end product. You use a phone. You have no idea how the phone works. So I think it comes down to changing the way people think. But by doing that, you need to educate them right from birth. And a lot of people can be educated on how to view things differently. Back on the point of teenagers. When people say, how would you deal with restless teenagers? Well, I think I use the exact same words as I used in the last. You're projecting your values of the monetary system onto a different system which doesn't have those values. The idea that you're using the word restless, and you're also using the word teens. Restless being an adjective. I think it's an adjective. Restless. Yeah. Or I don't know. Restless. Restless is just no. It's not restless. It's things that have made environmental influences which have made someone behave a certain way is what you're talking about. And teens is a label. Again, you put a label on a group of people. Whereas in the future, the languages will refer to a specific reference. So the whole question itself is just a reflection of their culture within the monetary system. And the reality of the situation is people are made up of their experiences and their environments, and they behave a certain way. And you have to accept that, and you have to look at why people behave certain ways. So the answer to that question would be, obviously you'd tell them how the conditions would be different, but then you'd say, you'll have more questions, and I can see you want to ask more questions like the one you've just asked. Before you do, and then you say, what you're doing is you're projecting your culture through these questions and into this new system. I'd like you to think about what I'm saying, so that rather than asking these questions, you can change the way you think. Maybe you can't even do that. Maybe that's the wrong way. You can't even tell them that. Maybe you have to try and show them how your values are. Again, like we were talking about earlier. So I think when people are asking these questions, you can answer them. And I don't think it'll really. I think when they're asking these questions, what they're really doing is they're pleading with you. You know, the subconscious, the real person is pleading with you to tell them the truth of the Venus Project, really. But they just don't know how to say it, so they're asking these questions. You have to help them understand. Sorry to go on so long.
Nick, I think if you don't mind, Angus said he was typing someone else who might not be watching.
Well, I mean, I wrote like restless. If they've been engaged since childhood, it's likely they would not be restless. They could do anything that they wish, whatever's engaging them at the time, and it's very much agree with what James was saying, like where people put, it's just groups, isn't it? I mean, I've heard, well, since I've been talking about the Venus Project and the Zeitgeist movement over the years, I've heard it described as a bunch of do-gooder hippies trying to put the world to rights when there's nothing really wrong, and I've heard a bunch of university students who just left or whatever, who are again trying to put the world to rights. And I suspect there's some students who've left university in the Venus Project, and I suspect there's some hippies in the Venus Project, And that's the thing, if you want to look at groups and generalize, it's really easy, isn't it? We'll just label this group of people that, and then their traits are this, and then we don't have to think about it, do we? Because it's really easy. Put them all in a big box, put them over there, call them that. But it is about individuals, and as you say, restless teenagers. I mean, yeah, they're in a box for, they're called teenagers, and they're apparently not engaged. Well, if they've been educated, they've been stimulated since birth, encouraged to do whatever they're enjoying. So they wouldn't be restless, would they?
I'll just add onto that before Angus goes. The interesting thing, reading a little bit, sorry Angus, you're back now. Just reading quickly, I read a little bit about neurochemistry and stuff, and by the way, James, I'm so excited you're watching that lecture series. Please keep going through them all. They're so good. It's unbelievable. He's got a couple of books as well, and if you want to read it, I'll let you know which one's the serious one. But awesome. The thing about philosophy, doing this kind of assumptions and making judgments about whole groups of people, is actually kind of like a part of the brain, and we're not sure whether it's wholly like introduced or learnt, or it's kind of just a way of the way it's set up, or very much more likely a combination of the both. But basically, your brain really is lazy. It wants to do everything as lazily as possible. It takes huge shortcuts all the time. It's the reason why sometimes you just be like, and it's just like there's nothing there because your brain's taken this shortcut and just gone crazy about something. And it's the same about thinking, oh, these people are the same. It's very much laziness, and I believe we can be kind of taught out of it, or at least taught to think it through a little bit more. Because I now I kind of read a bit about that, about how your brain takes these shortcuts. I'm now kind of going, okay, well, let's try and think it through a little bit more, take it down. But there's just interesting little things to add. Angus. Yeah, James, sorry. Path of least resistance is exactly the kind of thing I was going down.
Yes, so my main issue is that currently students at that age just aren't excited by our current education system. Then they come home to potentially limited stimulus. I know this isn't everyone, but a large proportion of that bracket can certainly be said that is a major issue. And the society should seek to nurture any sort of enthusiasm that people have. When you're at that sort of age, or you're at that sort of 11, 12, and a teacher will go around that classroom and ask them, what do you want to be when you grow up? And you'll get astronauts, you'll get firemen, you'll get all of these sort of things. So fairly idealistic concepts, but at least they have a goal, they have an idea. If you want to be a fireman, you potentially want to save people, make a difference. You might be slightly athletic as well because you feel that you can deal with dangerous situations. So being a mechanic in that sort of environment would actually be really, really useful. And so we want to provide a suitable platform to be able to channel each individual enthusiasm. And as we mentioned about that sort of plasticity of the brain at that sort of point, as they evolve and they change their ideas of what they potentially want to be, you can narrow down what their goals and ideas and their potential strengths are, and provide projects so that they can actually then take out away from the classroom and actually, with the sort of increased access of information, be able to explore them in their own and be able to provide that creative input and actually get involved and actually care about the work that they're doing. Also, actually, in this sort of Venus project, they talk a lot about having sports facilities and actually being able to really have the freedom of access of that really will propel people, because if people come home, they're slightly disgruntled with school or whatever, and they just want to mess around, they want to do something, actually channeling that into a athletic ability will increase their health and life expectancy and everything, and that means that they get to socialize a lot more, not just in front of a computer screen. They actually get to talk and exchange and actually have that sort of perspiration. They'll come home a little bit tireder, but they'll feel more fulfilled.
Yeah, I think sports is going to be quite interesting, because I think, yeah, as if we do start moving into it, people won't be up for getting rid of sports completely straight away and just going to the gym to keep healthy or anything. I see we're probably going to evolve a whole bunch of cooperative sports, I think, which could be cool. Maybe you go and play golf and there's 4 of you and it's just total score wins. You go for a high score. You want to try and beat your previous high score, something like that. Yeah, cool. So, Restless Teenagers, product of today's system. Let's have a look at the answer on the website. So, A1, how do restless teenagers fit into the system, or rather, what is available for them to do? Although many forms of arrogant behavior and racial prejudice have been with us for centuries, it is because the conditions that produce this behavior remain relatively unaltered. Insane behavior cannot be changed unless the conditions responsible for it are removed. From our point of view, the differences between a peace-loving humanist and a warlord will not be found in the genes of an individual, but the environments they live in. Most of the education in the future will be that of a generalist, in which people are exposed to many of the factors that comprise the web of life and their interrelationship. Behavior in a resource-based economy will reflect that culture. Will all people be alike? Yes, in certain areas. They will all work to protect the environment and extend maximum courtesy to one another regardless of race, colour or creed. They will promote individuality and creativity and reject the notion of any final frontiers. During the transition from a monetary-based society to a resource-based society, many of the older patterns will still prevail. Children have insatiable curiosity. The aim of the future is to harness this rather than destroy it. Does anyone else feel like I just answered a completely different question?
He mentioned children at the end.
Okay, that's good. I can see that it kind of relates, but it doesn't do what we said, which is it does in a general term of showing what explaining the difference between a humanist and a warlord. Fair enough. Teenagers fit onto that spectrum. Cool. Any last kind of thoughts on that, or any other completely off-topic questions you want to go over?
I was going to make a point about the point about sports. I used to do as I heard about free running or parkour. It's a sport and it's done outside, usually in like urban areas, and it's basically, I wouldn't say it's acrobatics, but it's a form of athletics which can be mixed with acrobatics, but it's entirely down to yourself how you go about that. But I was part of the Northern Parkour, they were called, a group of people who meet up weekly, and they still do, and they'll train parkour, they'll teach you, and that is a sport in itself, but parkour isn't about competition. People have tried to make parkour into competitions, like you see, for example, Ninja Warrior, those sort of programs. That's an example of how they've turned that sort of style of sport into competition. But parkour, in its purest form, is called freedom of movement. It simply teaches you the most efficient ways to move. Again, it goes into efficiency, optimum ways to move, like for example, optimum ways to behave. And I found that it sort of they say like the philosophy behind it is it helps you get over obstacles in your life, real obstacles. It trains you like you can overcome things. I guess it teaches you that if you learn the optimum way of moving over something or around a certain obstacle, then it trains you in later life that nothing's impossible if you know your limits and stuff. So that's an example. I was just making the point that sports in the future will have that sort of mentality where it'll be an optimum sort of movement system, or you'll be moving towards the optimum way of moving for yourself. And there was never any competition in our group. It was always like if you were struggling with something, someone would help you, and it was always about progressing and self-progression and getting better at something.
I think sports going to be a sort of a grey area, certainly during transition. I know that Jack talks about the fact that there is no need for the competitive nature of sports, and I can see the downside, of competitive sports, but I thought about this, for quite a while, and obviously, like lots of young boys want to be footballers today, and there is monetary motivation for that. Yeah, the X Factor. Christ, don't start me on that. But because I thought about football, and I thought, well, I never wanted to be a footballer, but I thoroughly enjoyed playing football. And you get to this thing, well, there's kids, young kids growing up who will enjoy kicking a ball about. And, one of the things you can do with a ball is play football. And why wouldn't kids do that? If they're enjoying it, then surely great. It doesn't need to be, it doesn't need to have the money reward. You don't need to have a league, but if you enjoy kicking a ball about the field, then, you should. It's the emphasis on winning that we have nowadays that's wrong. That it is, the enjoyment should be the participation. Over to you, Angus.
I guess this is something that I disagree with the Venus Project then, because I think a competitive outlet is very healthy for a society. And having that to potentially push people further, then potentially they'd be willing to go themselves, is a good thing to have. Also, in this sort of Venus society or whatever, when warfare is completely removed, sport is one of those things that really propels excellence in equipment and fine-tunes things in the way that you want to streamline and make things as efficient as possible. We were talking about parkour in the sense that that is efficiency of movement. Having a point system attached to that will always occur and be accounted for. And if we're trying to explore people's creativity and say if somebody is naturally gifted at sports, then I feel that they should be given an outlet to be able to produce that and provide not only not really self-importance, but just like self-worth for themselves and pride in the fact that they can do something to a high ability. It'll also encourage others who potentially have a fan base along those sort of lines as well to excel them to higher heights. And I feel that having that as sort of trying to think of the word. Sorry, guys. All right, I'll leave it at that. I might come back to it.
It's interesting. I know what you're saying. To do better, you need a scoring system. Otherwise, how do you know you're getting better? Fair enough. I think the main change might be, and I still don't think there's a huge amount of it today, but I think today it depends on whether you're doing it for yourself or for what other people give you, respect or attention or money or whatever. And I genuinely think today that the people who do very well in all these sports and all this stuff, even people who do really well in business, they do it because they enjoy what they're doing, not because of what they get from it. So I was a musician. I love playing guitar and stuff, and I really enjoy playing guitar. I don't care if anyone's watching, and that in the end is why I'm not. I gave up music because I write music for me, not anyone else. So it's obviously unsellable. James?
Yeah, like when you talk about the scoring system, and so you also how you're playing guitar. Like when you play an instrument, if you think about playing an instrument, an instrument doesn't produce anything. It doesn't produce any resources. All it does do is music gives it an emotional response to people. I should say, people have an emotional response to it. So, if, for example, you play a certain way, but someone grades it badly, that doesn't mean your music isn't optimum. It just means that they have a different preference. And likewise with sports, for example, with the Venus Project, for example. With parkour, for example, if someone, for example, I have a heart condition, so when I was doing parkour, I couldn't do all the things. I couldn't do all the backflips. I couldn't do all the running, sprinting things. So I would adapt what I could do. So if it was a point-based system, I would probably get much less points than everyone else. Does that mean that I would be I wasn't as good at, or I wasn't performing as? No, because I have a heart condition. I have a different set of tools. I'm a different person. Where I have to adapt and do the best that I can do. And the reason why that's really good is because it's not about performing to a team or meeting standards. It's about personal, individual, unique. Being yourself, understanding who you are, your limitations, and progressing, self-progression. It's all about you. It has absolutely nothing to do with anyone else. And that's how I think sports shouldn't be graded. It should be something where you yourself, you should have an internal grade for yourself based on your physical abilities. Once you understand your physical limitations, you can start pushing the boundaries, and within yourself, you'll know your own limitations. You don't need numbers on a piece of paper written as a generalization for everyone, because people will naturally fall up above and below that line. And by putting a line in, you're saying that if you're below that line, you're below the average, and that makes you feel bad. If you're above it, that makes you feel good, and you're creating a hierarchy there. I don't think there should be any grading system for sports. I think it should be, you should train people, educate people with the Venus Project mindset, so that they don't be competitive, and you should simply give them access to areas and let them come up with their own sports and their own way of thinking. Like if someone encounters something in nature, maybe they'll make their own little sport. Maybe a new society, they'll find ways of exercising in their own way that pleases them. So yeah, that's why I disagree with having a points-based system in sports.
Okay, so coming on from James's point there, he's saying that he medically was underperforming because of a potential sort of deformity. Obviously, that's the sort of wrong word, but a lack of natural ability because he was blocked because of a medical condition. So that's what the sort of Paralympics are for. If you weren't actually able to compete at the most optimal level because of a bodily condition, then you'd be put down into a lower category. And you said that you were comparing yourself between people who didn't have that restriction. So it means that you've automatically put yourself in a body of people who you have to work a lot harder to maintain the similar results that they would. So yeah, that natural grading curve is an issue, and the Paralympics is something that could be heavily expanded upon, and which is why golf and everything like this, there's a whole bunch of handicap systems that come into play. I rode at a very highly competitive level and did international events and things. This is a very heavily numbers-based sport. When you exercise, you're mainly doing it on those indoor rowing scenes. You're literally staring in front of a screen that has a number on it. And that number is very good psychologically because you can compare that to what you did last time and then try and beat it or improve upon it. That's self-reliance and trying to push yourself further in that sort of self-capacity. But having that ability to then face other people of similar abilities and try to win as long as you're not a sore loser, I think is a very predominant way to go about it. Like, I wasn't the best, but I didn't turn up to an event where there are 150 people racing in this division. Say I came like 50th or something out of 150. I didn't feel bad. I felt proud of the fact that I did perform at my optimum performance. And you'll know you have a bad race. Say if you picked up a guitar for the first time, you know that you're going to be bad unless you're somehow ridiculously naturally gifted and have dreamt about it and you suddenly write a sonnet or something. You know that you can improve upon that. And so yes, it is a perception thing. But you can always improve, but you need that gradient of improvement to give self-worth to people and to encourage them to improve further beyond that point.
Yeah, no, I see where you're coming from, and I'm kind of with you. I think in terms of measuring performance in an area that you want to excel at, fine. Comparing yourself with people around you for motivational purposes, fine. Thinking that you're better than someone who's lower than you, which is essentially what the competition mindset is that's where it changes. There's no feeling of I'm better than you. There's understanding of possibly why people are in different areas. For instance, what you said about Paralympics was very interesting, but the thing is, everyone should be in the Paralympics. There's no human type A. So like there's never a level playing field. There can't be. Like what's his name? Bolt, the sprinter. Sorry, I forgot his name. Something Bolt. Usain Bolt. Let's just say that he's got slightly longer legs than other people. That's what helps him run fast. You know what I mean? Everyone is fucked up in certain ways. Like there's no one's sane, no one's insane. Everyone's on the same spectrum kind of thing. It's similar with things that could arrest you in sport and all that stuff. I got glasses, say I can't go back and play rugby anymore because I can't wear contacts because I'm just really grossed out by that, or I've had bad experiences basically in the past, and it's hard for me to get around that. So there's that. And the thing is, of course, people can do this. It's going to be absolutely fine. If you want to, if you want to row and you want to row really well, fair enough, great. And there'll be spare time where you can do all that stuff. It wouldn't necessarily be kind of encouraged as much as sport is today, as in taking you towards professional sport. I think people will be much in the education system much more propelled towards how do I help people around me. If you can combine your sport with helping people around you, then that would be great. And generally, a lot of sport is really good for health, giving you motivation, all that stuff. But in the end, who cares if Usain Bolt can run under 9 whatever, 100 meters? How does that help anyone? It's a great achievement of him, fair play. But outside of himself, I don't think it really helps anyone.
Yeah. So, like, I agree with what you said. Like, everyone should be in the Paralympics. I like that idea, but I'd go one step further than that. In that, when I was talking about what a cake isn't good, a cake is simply its ingredients. Likewise, it would be a pointless act to compare yourself with other people, because if you take away the word people and just look and use the description material compositions, you'll have people with different material compositions and configurations. Some of them more optimum for doing certain actions. Usain Bolt has a composition and configuration for very optimum running speeds. And if I look at another person, well, for me, for example, I have a heart condition. I would have a much less optimum configuration and material composite for doing the same thing. Now, if you then said, well, okay, put yourself in a competition. Well, when in competitions today, they said this guy's good and this guy's bad. Well, it's not about bad. You're just different compositions, completely different people. And when it comes down to like if you take away competition, and you said everyone should be in the Paralympics, well, putting everyone even into something where even when they're comparing themselves, it's an irrelevant thing. All comparing yourself is saying that someone has, if like two people are running and one person has a more optimum configuration for doing that running, like, why should you compare yourselves? Because it's just irrelevant. All it does is create negative feeling when you start comparing. It's just no. That's not something which should be done. Like, you should literally not give. It shouldn't even come into your thought process. Anyone else. It literally is. I have my composition. Literally, there's nothing I can change about that. It's my DNA which is giving me this composition, and my environmental influences, for example, my diet and all the rest of it. I am who I am right now. I know I have this maximum ability in this area and a minimum, and this is my ability. Like, and that obviously is affected in probability, and also my mindset at the time. Am I very motivated? And that'll increase my abilities. Or am I very demotivated? And that'll. So everything we are is simply the environment. And if you take it into account, then the need for comparison and the need for competition are just irrelevant, because once you know enough about a human being and what makes them able to do things such as running or thinking, or how psychology, the brain works in combination with movement, then it's not a case of placing bets on who's better, or it's simply because this person has this percentage optimum ability in this range. You have a slightly lesser optimum. And it's almost like a numbers game it becomes, because you can record and mathematically understand what someone is and their abilities, and then it's a case of, well, this person will have a higher probability than this person, so this person. And like, well, great. So, right, it's now a game of maths. Like the only reason we bet is because we don't understand, we don't know enough information, so we have to sort of guess on who has the highest probability of winning a game. But if you had the raw data and the psychological state of each person, you'd then be able to say this person has a much higher probability than the rest of them to win, so put your money on that person. So once you sort of understand human psychology, human biology, and you have a more rounded knowledge of what it is, what a human is, and you realize they're just matter configured, then it's literally a case of an individual in their body has to exercise to be at optimum of their own, and it's irrelevant what everyone else is in comparison to that person. It's a very individual thing, and that's what I got from parkour. And obviously, I was with a group of people with different abilities, but I wasn't copying what they were doing. I would go off and do my own thing. Like I'd go and do some balancing, which didn't require any physical exertion. But that didn't mean that we were, segregated or anything. It's just that I did different things, and that's what people should do. They should be able to be in one community and be happy together, but go and do their own things and not care what someone else is doing. And that's how it was for me. Like we're all friends, but we're all doing different things. And if you wanted to learn what they were doing, you'd come and ask them, and they'd teach you what they know. That's what I think the Venus Project should be, where everyone does their own thing, but if you want information, it's available, and then you can go off in that direction if you're interested.
I agree with a lot of what is being said. There's so many sort of bits and pieces, but fortunately I've got a cold, so I don't want to talk for that long. Like as you said, competition at heart is about seeing if you perform above or below your expectations, as you said, Angus. And I mean, I've got to say, I struggled for a long time with the Venus Project's outlook or views on sport. But a lot of the sports that have been mentioned have been individual sports, and it's that is, as you say, trying to beat yourself, improve your performance, and it is a fight with yourself, and in that respect, that is great. If you like with my boy in the running race, if you want to run against someone else to see who's the fastest, well, that's fine. What isn't fine is the attitude of, well, I beat you, which then promotes, well, I'm better than you, which that isn't fine. There's that thing, well, it's the taking part that should be the enjoyment, and really it should be, I mean, like for my boy winning the race without 7 other kids for him to run against, he'd just be running. He wouldn't know how good he was, although how good he was wouldn't change. It shouldn't matter, but the people that he beat are just as important as him there. Each person in their place creates the thing. And I believe, Angus, you mentioned at some point about with the competition thing and the winning, about improving your self-worth. Again, about the self. If you've had a good education and you're being encouraged to be, the best person you can be, then your self-worth doesn't really need another massage, because now in the society today we all need a big massage of self-worth. You need someone following you around telling you you're a beautiful human being, because we're so trodden upon. But if you're being encouraged to be the best human being you can be, you don't need competition to measure yourself. You know within yourself you're doing your best, and that's all it takes. We also mentioned when we were talking about the education of teenagers and children, how we can give them this project to do and this to do and that to do, as if we had some requirement like we have today to group all the children together in a box and force this education system down them. We encourage children to pursue what they're interested in. You don't have to you don't have to have a predefined course of learning for these children. I think it's very hard for us not to think with our today mind when we imagine how things might be. But it's worth thinking things through, critically, as I believe you guys say. As Aidan said, sport won't change overnight. But it will change if everything else around it has changed. No one will care who is at the top of the Premiership. These team games, as such, team games is almost in our society today. I mean, when you look, especially at the fans, who are obviously very, very bored because they're watching people do something when they could be doing stuff themselves. But you look at the fans and see how aggressive they can become over their team. It's comical. It's like practicing war. That thinking has got to go. And there's a lot of things in a lot of sports that address such things with transfer systems and and we could talk about it forever. But it is a fact. It's the mindset. There's nothing wrong with sport itself. It's essentially physical education, physical exercise. That's great, but it's a mindset behind it that's important. Aidan.
Cool, thanks, Nick. Didn't really want to add any more. I wanted to just kind of say, hey, Angus, we're not shouting at you or anything. I know you may not be sold on what we're saying. That's fair enough. But I just wanted to kind of get it back to you to see if there's anything you want clarifying or anything like that.
So what the idea in the Venus Project is that athletics in any form is never brought into the media or public knowledge, and everything is completely self-involved and no information is shared among what people's performance actually is in any historical fashion.
Doubt never. It's very hard to say. I don't. They haven't really outlined it too much. They have said, of course, sport and exercise will be greatly promoted, especially as people want to have loads of free time. What exactly sports they promote? Jacques has kind of addressed this kind of before. Of it, it's hard to say at the moment. You've got to see how people evolve and change at the time, and where we are during the transition will be very different. I think it's personal now. I think, okay, let's say football as a sport. I think the big teams will end up kind of devolving, and you end up with groups of players who want to play with each other, not because they're getting paid, not because there's someone in charge telling them all to play here or whatever. And you end up with smaller kind of groups around about, and there'll probably be kind of communities of people who like to follow various teams, and there'll be stats nuts out there that will be taking all these stats and posting them up all over the place in their own forms that they want. But in the way that it's kind of educated, it will be very much about individual performance. And this person has got better and better and better. Let's see what he does next week. Great. As long as that doesn't end up putting kind of negative pressure on them or anything like that. I don't know exactly. You've got to be sports scientists, psychologists, all of this stuff, which I'm definitely not.
My point is that you can have sport at a high level of competitiveness without having that warlike fan base, as you said. They can be proud to be associated potentially with a group of people, but not in a offensive and threatening way to other people who are potentially I think many people in the Venus Project are professional sports people, so it's not thoroughly addressed. However, I reasonably sure it would be alright, yeah, so it wouldn't be outlawed. I think it's a really good aspect, and sorry, the way you were saying and talking about it was that it actually looked like it would be completely removed and not publicised or anything like that. But yeah, no, I think it's really good to actually have that in that sort of aspect.
Yeah, it will definitely be there. There'll be same with video games. There'll be people out there making competitive video games because they want to do this stuff. This is taken directly from a sci-fi book, which is just I've read it and it kind of led me into the Venus Project in the way that it's set up. It's basically the only thing I ever read that was post-scarcity based as a society. And in one of the stories, there's a guy who's the best game player. He does loads of different games in this culture. And he basically was the best. There's like a couple other guys that are pretty good as well, but he was basically the guy. And just the way that people there's just I can't remember exactly what it was, but there's a bit in it where people kind of felt a little bit embarrassed that he was so obsessive about this one thing. And it kind of the people kind of thought, oh, maybe he's kind of just there's a bit of kind of social, we're generalist people. We tend to dip our hands into lots of different things, and you're spending all your time on this one thing, which doesn't actually help other people. So there's obviously his fan group, which loved him, but generally the kind of people was he's a bit of a weird character, and I don't know, but generally that's where I would possibly see it. It's always so obsessed about one thing that it's kind of well, there are other things in the world, and you tried them. Just from my point of view, and probably people wouldn't be thinking like that in the Venus Project, but I don't know. Just thought I'd share.
Yeah, I mean, like I just said there, look, the American football fans are awesome. Sports when you think about what the Venus Project are trying to achieve, sport's not going to be top of the list. Whatever way you look at it, it's not going to be top of the list. And by its very nature, the Venus Project requires scientists, engineers, perhaps more practical and intelligent. I mean, like the Venus Project doesn't need some old raster. I mean, I'm pointless, but at the same time, I'm not outlawed. I'm not put upon to I must toe the line and do this and do that. Yet the society around me would, be more encouraging. So I would probably be more likely to want to help out. And in sport, there's no reason to stop sport. There's no reason to stop the competitive nature. It doesn't require reward anymore. So if you take the reward away, perhaps some people would be less interested. But the people that are interested, enjoy it. Do what you enjoy. Do what is engaging to you. And you know, yeah, if you're, you know, if you're into this one game and that's all you do, and you appear really close-minded and not experiencing the rest of the world, you might stand out and look like a bit strange, but that's all right. Yeah, that's the thing. It's all right as long as you're not harming people, as long as it's not detrimental to what's, you know, going on in the world. You know, I think that's one of the important things. You know, not doing things that are detrimental. You know, and a lot of the things that we discuss are just, you know, grey areas or perhaps not so immediately important. You know. And I do agree with a lot of what you said, Angus, you know. I don't think I'm having a go at all. I certainly am not.
Cool. Well, I guess we probably wrap that up for a little bit. Or feel free to send us a message if you wanna do something. It's not a problem, Angus. It's not a competition to know everything about the Venus Project. Oh, I'm just terrible. I'm turning into a dad joke person already. I'm only 26. All right. I was going to stop the broadcast.